Marie Water, baie welkom en dankie dat ek kom kuier het vanmôre. Kan jy vir ons net eers sê, wat is, jy het 'n baie interessante boek geskryf oor, ek het net so vinnig deur hom gebly in die begin, The Bronze Killer. Wat presies is hierdie siekte in gewone Afrikaans?
Dis eintlik 'n wanorde. Die siekte ontstaan eintlik deur die komplikasies, die ingewikkeldhede van hemokromatose. Want as 'n mens te veel yster in die liggaam het, sal dit een of ander tyd in een van die organe in die lewe in die liggaam behou word en dit sal daardie orgaan beskadig en dalk vernietig. Byvoorbeeld in die geval van die pankreas, dit is waar mense dan 'n tipiese soort suikersiekte ontwikkel. Dit kan kanker van die lewer veroorsaak. Dit kan 'n vroegtydige menopause in vrouens veroorsaak. Allerhande potentieel noodlottige komplikasies kan daar uitsprei.
And Mari, it's the most common genetic disorder among South Africans, is that right?
Yes,
what sort of numbers are we talking about here?
We're talking here possibly of some 40,000 South Africans who are already at risk, which means that they carry both genes for this to happen to them. Then you have an enormous carrier population. I would estimate that there must be about 450,000 people who carry one gene. While we're on the subject, let us just please explain what it is to be a carrier, because in these days of AIDS and so on, we must make it very clear that you do not catch hemochromatosis. You inherit it in the same way as you do your blue eyes or red hair or whatever it is. You do need two genes for this to happen to you. If it so happens that both your parents pass on one gene to you, you will then inherit two genes, and these two genes have the potential of affecting a regulating mechanism in the body. It's actually an inborn error of metabolism, which is what a man called Sheldon called it. And because you lack that controlling mechanism, your body will absorb iron from every conceivable source, but there will be no sort of, if you imagine your fridge with a thermostat that switches itself on and off, well, you don't have that sort of control mechanism. And as that iron accumulates in the body, so it will destroy certain vital organs. Now, if you have inherited only one gene, you do not develop the full-blown disease, but we have evidence of people developing some of the complications. It was known as an autosomal recessive disorder, which meant that it didn't necessarily follow on as far as the children were concerned. But since there's such a tremendous carrier population today, which means people with one gene, it's very, very likely that somebody who already carries one gene will marry somebody who carries a gene. And it's almost beginning to look now like an autosomal dominant disorder.
So if each of the parents have a gene, they automatically pass those two genes on to their children, do they?
Not necessarily. The children will then have a sort of 50-50 chance. But if you have hemochromatosis, every one of your children will carry one gene. If you think of the figures for South Africa, picture a class, an average class of 30 school children. You've got about 6 children there who possibly, we're talking now primarily about what in North America is known as Caucasian children, European children, white children. We know there's a tremendous incidence of hemochromatosis amongst black people who cook in iron pots and used to brew beer, although those figures are declining now as methods improve. But that is what we call secondary hemochromatosis. When it comes to hereditary hemochromatosis, there has not been research, as far as I know, to establish any genetic disorder amongst blacks, but in the whites it's very common.
Mevrou, gewoonlik moet mens waak daarteen dat jy te min yster in jou bloed het. So wat u nou sê is dat 'n mens moet bloedtoetse doen, of die dokters moet bewus wees daarvan om bloedtoetse te doen vir te veel yster in die bloed.
Ja, en dit word nie algemeen uitgevoer nie. Daar was natuurlik 'n tyd in die ou dae toe dit dikwels 'n geval was dat daar 'n groot tekort aan yster was, maar deesdae in ons vereniging wil regtig nie sien dat mense ly omdat hulle bang is om yster te gebruik nie. Maar die dieet is vandag so vol yster dat dit byna onmoontlik is om nie elke dag 'n oorvloed van yster in te kry nie.
Ja.
Amara, you're personally involved with this with your family.
Yes, I am.
What are the symptoms? How did you discover that two
Well, the
members of your family
symptoms are
had it?
very, very vague to begin with. They vary, and unfortunately, by the time they become clinically manifest, so that the physician picks them up readily, it could almost be too late. Hence our great desire to make an iron profile test part of every doctor's diagnostic toolkit, if I can put it that way. We'd like to see that routine tests for iron overload become more common. But as the disease progresses, it could manifest itself as a sudden onset diabetes. If that is coupled with a characteristic tan, which a lot of these people have, sometimes it's not an all-over tan, sometimes it's brown pigmentation, then this, which used to be known as bronze diabetes, is probably due to an overload of iron. If it is coupled with one of the myriad other symptoms, then further investigation is definitely warranted. One of the most common symptoms is arthritis of these two knuckles. And our database shows that joint pain and joint disease is one of the most common symptoms. Cirrhosis of the liver, enlarged liver, is always suspect. Even gout, believe it or not. There is a pseudo-gout, which is sometimes misdiagnosed.
That's also joints, of course.
Yes. Even rheumatoid arthritis, I think, warrants further investigation these days, because how do you know that it isn't due to iron overload?
Well, in fact, how does the GP know? I mean, the GP of today is an extremely busy man. How does he keep up with all these, or what Paul and I discuss as sort of new diseases, new conditions all the time?
We realise that, and we realise too that that is why hemochromatosis has been overlooked, because unfortunately the medical textbooks of yesterday said that it was rare. And in today's busy world, how can the doctor keep up with particularly a disease if he never expects to see a case?
Yeah.
And to him it was only an exam question. But we're going to make him aware of the fact that it is common.
Mevrou, ekskuus, u praat aan mekaar van ons. Terloops, ek moet nie komplimenteer. Jy bly hoe lank in Canada?
15, amper 15 jaar.
U praat baie goeie Afrikaans. Dis baie goed om te sien.
Dankie.
Nog steeds.
Ek hoop ek
wil net u sê ons, dis die u het gekom met die oog op 'n stigting in Suid-Afrika soortgelyk aan die een in Canada.
Dis reg. Die een in Canada het naderhand ontwikkel totdat dit nou die International Association of Hemochromatosis Societies geword het. Ons het lede in 14 lande. Ek het nou net in Engeland gehelp. Ek was geëerd om van die papiere te onderteken om die Engelse vereniging te stig. Die Suid-Afrikaanse, eintlik ons het dit verander. Dit is nou die Hemochromatosis vereniging van Suidelike Afrika.
Ja.
Want ons het te veel navraag gekry van Swaziland en Botswana en Zimbabwe en so. En dit is wat ek eintlik nou hier kom doen het, om daardie vereniging te stig.
Our studio guest this morning was Mari Warder. We thank you very much for being with us, and let's hope, GPs will now begin to look out and diagnose this disease as early as possible. Thank you very much.